I'm back.
Hi, everyone. I'm
Hi.
Ting.
So this is Ting and this is Carson.
Hey.
And these two are some of the most incredible people I know on the planet. Would you like to introduce yourselves just briefly?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Ting from San Francisco. Well, all of us are from San Francisco. And I'll get into it later, but I've been a long-time burner. I basically was born on the playa.
I'm Carson. I'm a designer, creative director, and sort of informal architect also in San Francisco, and have been building Burning Man camps for the past 5 years.
So imagine an open desert that's 100, 200 square miles and 500 square kilometers in size. It's perfectly flat. And then out of this springs a city for 70,000 people, and then they all leave. And this is what it looks like when they're gone. There is absolutely not a trace that there was a city of thriving creativity that existed there. And this is what the city looks like. And this is because there's principles behind Burning Man and what's been created there. But you have to ask yourself, why does someone want to go to Burning Man?
This is the question. It's not easy to get out here. This is literally the middle of nowhere. Burning Man feels something like a Mad Max-themed rave on the surface of the moon. So why leave the city, why leave the air conditioning, this car, the restaurants, and come out to this, can you come back a slide actually? Why come into this expanse and this sort of, this void? One big reason, and you could ask 80,000 people and you would get 80,000 different answers, but I'll give you some of the key themes. One is a sense of awe. When you have driven through the desert, you've left civilization as you knew it, and you show up here in the middle of nowhere, and there is art and human expression and architecture and all the beauties of culture expressed on a scale beyond anything you've ever seen. It's really, there's nothing like it that's really accessible in my life, at least until I came here. Another key thing that brings people together at Burning Man is a relationship to what I would call the sacred. As religion's role in all of our lives has begun to change, there's sort of a void in this space and this way that we can gather and orient towards something beyond ourselves. So what you see here are temples. One of the key features every year at the Burn is a temple that's constructed collaboratively for free by the people there. And each becomes a vessel in relationship to the ancestors, to those who've come before us, and more importantly, those that we've lost in the past year or years. And these spaces get charged and filled with mementos and artifacts and poetry that's scrawled on the walls. And at the end of the burn, the whole thing is burned while 70 or 80,000 people stand silently watching it in one of the most profound experiences that I've ever had. Another reason people come to the burn is self-expression. People create art out of just the gesture of creativity with no expectation of compensation or reward. And they see each other's work, and there's something about the burn that creates a feedback loop for creativity and possibility. People see things that are able to be invented or created, that are beyond imagination, and they come back the next year. Maybe they didn't even think of themselves as an artist and create something on a massive scale. And surrealism. Coming to the burn is leaving the known world and stepping into a place where truly anything is possible. And you can't leave without a different sense of the potential of our culture and our world.
So you could ask yourself, where did this start? How did this even come about? So one of the co-founders of Burning Man, Larry Harvey, he had a quote that said, "Burning Man is not just a festival, it's not just a rave in the desert, it's actually a catalyst for creative culture and really freedom of expression around the world." And so the origin story behind Burning Man is kind of funny. There was this secret society called Cacophony Society in San Francisco, and they were basically pranksters. They loved assembling these spontaneous sort of spectacles in public spaces. So SantaCon, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's not on Christmas, but they have basically everyone dress up as Santa Claus and just fill up public spaces just for fun. And it's mostly, their motto is experiences beyond the mainstream. And their whole premise was, how can we actually create experiences that help people see a mirror of their culture and also see the absurdity of it and help reflect inwards. Larry Harvey, in 1986, he was heartbroken by his his girlfriend broke up with him. He went to the beach with his friends, and he wanted to create a little ritual for them. So they just built a little man out of wood and burned him. And year after year, they started gathering more friends. And by 1990, they had just outgrown any public space in San Francisco. And so they found Black Rock Desert where no one would bother them. The police weren't there. And they started Burning Man there. So over time, since 1986, it's grown the population all the way to 35,000 in 1995. And then last year was about 70,000? Yeah. So as the population has grown, the city has also evolved and become more complex.
It's fascinating how the arc of civilization is mirrored in a microcosm within this sort of experimental civilization of Burning Man. And at first, there was a lot of chaos and anarchy, and that was sort of the guiding principle. But over time, it became clear that you needed principles. You know, chaos itself wasn't enough. You needed some constraint to balance it. And so 10 principles were articulated that were sort of emerging from the culture, and these are them. Radical inclusion, everybody's welcome. Gifting, decommodification, not commercializing things. Radical self-reliance, radical self-expression, communal effort, civic responsibility, leaving no trace, participation, and immediacy, being fully there and nowhere else.
And there's a lot of power to these principles. If you take gifting and decommodification, for instance, it means there's no money exchange on the playa, which means it's a different economy. It's not an economy of what can you give me for X. It's an economy of what can I just give you, and what can other people give to each other. And it really starts to transform the way that we look at how society is structured.
One of my favorites is participation or no spectators. And so as Burning Man has evolved, you know, folks like Eric Schmidt and Elon Musk go, and even them, they all have to participate. You cannot just watch, everyone has to participate. And actually there's a little bit of stigma if you're just sitting around.
Mine, radical self-reliance, I would say, is my favorite. There's something about camping in the middle of this lake bed, exposed to the elements, that reminds you how little you really need, how much of what we carry and keep is unnecessary. When you strip it to its essence, it reveals how connected we can be.
And everyone has their own origin story of going to Burning Man. Mine was, I just graduated from high school, I was 18 years old, and my older brother, who was in college and super cool, calls me up and he says, "Hey, do you want to go camping?" I said, "Yeah, what do I need?" He's like, "You know, camping stuff, tent, sleeping bag, maybe a cooler." I'm like, "Awesome." He's like, "Great, I'll pick you up in 3 hours." Picks me up, we drive out to Burning Man, and ever since my life has not been the same. And you know, in 1995, it kind of was like camping in this really extreme environment. And you had to form together into a camp to survive in the elements. And so you would form these extremely strong bonds with the people that you were there with. And I think that these strong bonds still exist. This is a city that has to go survive in the desert. And sandstorms will come through and whip the whole thing apart. Rain will come down, it'll get cold. And everyone binds together to withstand these elements.
So my year was also 1995, and I'm a little younger than North, so I was 5. And my father took me and my sister when I was very young. This is just a view of what the city looked like, and you can see there's a little bit of order. One of the founders went around with his truck and a stick and made this circle, but no one seemed to really care. So this is me when I was 5, just loving life. Yeah, and so just, you know, there was no other kids. It was just me and my sister and my dad. And as my dad calls it, we were free-range children. He would let us go through the day, and he's a photographer, and he was there for the art, and we were there just, it was the best playground. We would climb the art cars, you know, get snow cones, talk to all of the locals, and really it informed who I am today. It taught me so much about collaboration. If you go to the next slide, and you can just see, back then, everyone in Burning Man would actually help hoist up the man together. It was truly a communal effort. You know, there was no spectators. And so for me, whenever, you know, I'm just thinking about balance in my life, whenever I'm feeling a little bit lost or feeling out of balance, I always just remember what it felt like to be a 5-year-old on the playa, and it's actually been incredible to just feel a sense of community, of belonging. I always have this family of 70,000 people there, and also just it always reminds me of my own principles around collaboration, self-reliance, just being generous. So for me, it's been a source of immense amount of centering and my own self-discovery. And you can just see here some of the art cars back then.
So we formed a camp called Ideate, Carson and I, and we started it in 2012 with really a mission to bring people from around the world to Burning Man, to give them a landing pad. Last year, we brought an entire Pan-Asia crew there. This is how we met Richard and a lot of other people in this room. And then the other part of our mission is how do we radiate that back out into the rest of the world? How do we bring these principles to the world and just share our experiences with them and give people the tools that they need?
So my relationship to Burning Man, everybody who comes finds sort of a new version of themselves that their default life maybe hasn't given a chance to. For me, that was a role as an architect. And so since the first year that I came, imagine you have to get yourself there and your tent and your water and your food and your dust mask and everything you need. But I'm doing that for 70 people and building a camp right out of the gate. When I set out to do it, I wound up going back into history and looking at the history of nomadic cultures and other people who have taken on building temporary structures. And it's amazing. Really, this is how humanity started. In a sense, Burning Man is coming back to our essence as civilization. The first were Tibetans who make these incredible tents out of yak fur. These are in Jordan. These are Bedouins. These guys are actually in northern Scandinavia. These are reindeer herders. And I asked myself, what was it that drove all these people? And I think in this case, they were migrating and they were moving and collecting together in search of nourishment, more literally in their case. And I realized, so if we fast forward, a civilization came to rise. This is a camp that arose in the redwoods outside of San Francisco around the turn of the century. And there was so much abundance in civilization that they were going back to nature to reconnect with themselves. They were gathering in camps to reconnect with each other and reconnect with a sense of play. And they were connecting with each other to reconnect with a sense of cosmic perspective. This is sort of a futuristic safari camp that's being developed. In designing camps, I learned a few things. Real quick to briefly speak to it, you have to provide all the elements of civilization. You've got to have water and food and shelter and all of it. The challenge, though, in designing camps is giving people the right blend of control and providing for them and providing security, while at the same time allowing for their autonomy, their creativity, and their expression. The camps have gotten more sophisticated over time, and it's always a balance between, in this case, how much to provide space for the civilization and the society at large, and how much to provide it for the tribe internally.
And so these lessons we've carried on into creating a camp. And so part of our offerings and part of what we gift is we do a speaker series where we lead intellectual thought leadership on the playa to bring people together. We bring a community together that we have for housing. So these are hexayurts, so people can stay in it. And then one of our greatest communal efforts is we cook. So we feel that food is a way to bring people together, and so by creating a meal together and then having a meal together, it creates community. And so these are all different facets of building a camp. And when you think about it, you have to create a society from scratch every time. And every time you do this, you learn how to do it. And so we've divided it up into people that manage human, people that manage the power, people that make the showers, people that deal with the water, people that deal with the food, people that deal with building, people that deal with transporting, people that deal with striking. And you form these autonomous teams that all kind of work together, but are without a leader. And we found that that's one of our secrets as a camp, is to create a leaderless organization so that it can function. Because the problem with a leader is it's a single point of failure. And it doesn't involve everyone in the camp. And so this is why we've created structures that allow us all to come together and function. And so, very briefly, one of our projects was, could we create shipping containers on the playa where you could walk into one of them, be 3D scanned, walk into another shipping container, 3D print a figurine of you, and then take that figurine so that you didn't have to wait while it was being printed, and then deliver it with a drone to you to your GPS coordinate. So to think about this as a project in the middle of the playa is a real challenge. And so it took an entire camp to figure it out. And the first thing we made that was useful was a spork. And this is a very useful item. Maybe not the most glorious 3D printed thing. But we failed and we didn't provide clear enough instructions on how to go about doing this process. And all these people were coming in because they want to get 3D printed, but we didn't know how to do it. And so all those people that are really excited started to work together. And our biggest failure became our biggest success as these whiteboards started to fill up with a knowledge base that people were creating on the fly so that anyone that didn't have any knowledge of 3D printing could come in, they could fall into a process and make their 3D printed figurine. And this is just part of the spirit of Burning Man, of how people collaborate, work together to be able to create things. And it happens at the smallest scale, a little figurine on a 3D printer. It happens at a larger scale, bringing out shipping containers. Oh, I really want this to go really bad. It happens at the camp level, so you're actually constructing this camp. But when you zoom back, you realize that all the way from that 3D printed figurine up to the camp where food is being cooked and people are being housed, that it's happening on a scale of 70,000 people that are all self-assembling without leadership. And this is happening all over the world. There's now over 60 regional events that are happening, and they're Burning Mans. So this kind of culture and these principles are now spreading to the world.
And so we'll just leave you with this, is, having these 10 principles, they aren't just applicable on the playa, they apply to life itself. And so our question that we want to leave you with is, how can we prototype, and how can you use these principles to prototype and experiment in your communities, in your work, in your cities, just to make this a better world?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.